Most people underestimate how quickly words lose their value when they become predictable. When a man says you're beautiful, he often believes he is offering something meaningful, something flattering, something that should land deeply. But in reality, the human mind doesn't respond to repetition the way we assume it does. The more a phrase is used, the more it gets categorized as background noise. Not because the woman is ungrateful or dismissive, but because her mind has already processed it 1,000 times before. And here is where the misunderstanding begins. Men think attraction is built through approval, but psychological studies on emotional perception show something very different. The brain responds more strongly to specificity than to praise. General compliments trigger surface-level recognition, but they rarely activate emotional memory. In simple terms, "you're beautiful" is received, but it is not remembered in a meaningful way unless it is backed by something deeper. What actually stays with a person is not the compliment itself, but the awareness behind it. Because awareness signals attention, and attention signals value. When a man relies only on appearance-based praise, he unknowingly places himself in the same category as everyone else who noticed the same obvious detail. There is no distinction in it, no individuality, no emotional signature, and when there is no distinction, there is no impact. The mind doesn't store it as something significant, it files it away as familiar, but when language becomes specific, something changes at a psychological level. Specificity forces observation. It requires presence. It requires that the man is not just looking, but actually perceiving. And perception is where emotional connection begins. For example, instead of defaulting to "you're beautiful," imagine acknowledging the way she carries herself when she enters a room, or the way her expression changes when she talks about something she genuinely cares about, or how her presence shifts the tone of a conversation without her trying to dominate it. These are not surface observations, these are emotional readings, and when someone feels read in that way, they don't just feel seen, they feel understood. And being understood is far more powerful than being praised. There is also a deeper philosophical layer to this. When you repeatedly compliment only physical appearance, you unconsciously reinforce a very limited identity. You are telling her, even if unintentionally, that what stands out most is what is visible. But human attraction is not sustained by visibility alone. It is sustained by meaning, depth, and emotional resonance. A woman may hear "you're beautiful" and appreciate it, but it does not challenge her to feel anything new about herself. It does not make her reflect. It does not reveal anything she didn't already know. And anything that does not expand self-awareness eventually becomes emotionally neutral. Now contrast that with language that reflects experience rather than evaluation. When you shift from judging what she is to describing how she exists in your perception, the dynamic changes completely. You are no longer giving her a label. You are offering her a mirror, not a mirror of appearance, but a mirror of impact. And impact is what lingers. This is also where emotional intelligence becomes visible. Because emotional intelligence is not about saying more flattering things. It is about saying more accurate things. Accuracy requires attention. It requires slowing down internally and actually noticing the subtle details that most people overlook. That act alone creates differentiation, and differentiation is what creates attraction. There is a quiet but important truth here. People are not moved by being told they are valuable in generic terms. They are moved when someone reveals that they have noticed something about them that others have missed. That moment creates a shift in self-perception. It interrupts the routine way they see themselves. It creates reflection. And reflection is emotionally engaging. So when men rely on "you're beautiful," they are not necessarily doing something wrong, but they are staying at the lowest level of emotional communication. It is safe, it is socially acceptable, but it is not impactful. And over time, safety becomes forgettable. What changes everything is the willingness to go deeper than approval, to move beyond saying what is expected and start expressing what is observed. Because observation carries weight, it carries intention, it carries presence, and presence is what people actually respond to. When someone feels that your words are coming from attention rather than habit, they stop hearing you as just another voice. They begin to register you differently, not because you are trying harder, but because you are seeing clearer. And clarity in human interaction is rare. So the real shift is not about replacing "you're beautiful" with a trick or a line. It is about replacing automatic speech with conscious awareness. It is about moving from external validation to internal observation. It is about developing the ability to notice before speaking instead of speaking before noticing. Because at the end of the day, words are not powerful because of what they say. They are powerful because of what they reveal about the mind behind them. And when your words begin to reflect genuine perception instead of repetition, people don't just hear you anymore. They start to feel you in a completely different way. And that is the level where connection stops being accidental and starts becoming intentional. When we talk about attraction, most people instinctively assume it comes from charm, confidence, or the right words said at the right time. But psychologically, attraction is far more precise than that. It is not triggered by effort alone, and it is certainly not sustained by generic praise. What actually creates depth is emotional precision, your ability to reflect something true about the person in front of you, something they may not have fully articulated about themselves. This is where most communication fails, because saying "you're beautiful" does not require perception. It requires minimal cognitive effort. It is an automatic response, socially conditioned and widely available. And anything that is widely available loses its psychological weight. The human brain is built to filter repetition. It classifies familiar praise as low val, you input not because it is negative, but because it is expected. But emotional precision works differently. It forces you to slow down internally. It requires attention, not reaction. And attention changes everything in human connection. When a man observes a woman beyond her appearance, when he notices how she handles silence, how she responds under emotional pressure, how she expresses her thoughts when she is not trying to impress anyone, he is no longer operating at the surface level of interaction. He is entering psychological depth. And depth is what creates differentiation, because here is the truth most people miss. Attraction is not built on being liked. It is built on being recognized in a way that feels rare. A woman hears compliments about her appearance constantly, from strangers, from acquaintances, from social environments that reward surface-level observation. But she rarely encounters someone who comments on her emotional structure, her behavioral patterns, or the subtle intelligence in the way she communicates. So when that level of observation appears, it creates a break in expectation. It interrupts the normal flow of interaction. And psychologically, interruption is powerful. The mind pays attention to what breaks its pattern. So when you say something that reflects emotional accuracy, something that shows you are not just looking at her, but understanding how she operates internally, you are doing more than complimenting her. You are validating a part of her identity that is usually unseen. And being seen in that way creates emotional gravity. It's important to understand that emotional intelligence in communication is not about exaggeration or poetic language. It is about specificity. For example, noticing how she becomes more expressive when she talks about something she genuinely cares about, or how she listens differently when she is emotionally invested in a conversation, or how she carries herself when she is not performing socially, but simply existing in her natural state. These are not compliments, they are observations, and observations carry psychological weight because they imply presence. They signal that you are not distracted, not rehearsing, not trying to impress, but actually engaging with what is real. And that level of engagement is rare. Most interactions operate at what you could call social autopilot. People respond based on scripts, compliments, jokes, expected reactions. But emotional precision breaks that script. It replaces assumption with awareness, and awareness is what creates emotional depth. There is also a subtle philosophical shift that happens here. When you move from praising appearance to acknowledging emotional reality, you are no longer reinforcing identity based on external validation. You are reflecting identity based on internal expression. That means you are not telling her what she is supposed to be. You are mirroring what she already expresses in subtle ways. And that is where connection becomes meaningful. Because humans are not deeply moved by being told they are attractive. They are moved when they feel emotionally understood. Understanding creates a sense of alignment. It makes people feel less alone in their internal experience. And that feeling is far more powerful than admiration. Attraction deepens when communication feels like recognition rather than performance. When a woman feels that your words are not just socially constructed responses, but actual reflections of what you have noticed in her behavior and energy, she begins to experience interaction differently. It stops being casual exchange and starts becoming emotionally engaging. And emotional engagement is what builds attachment at a deeper level. This is why emotional precision is not about trying to be impressive. In fact, trying too hard destroys it. Because emotional accuracy cannot be manufactured, it has to be observed. It requires restraint, not exaggeration. It requires listening more than speaking and noticing more than reacting. And when you operate from that space, your communication changes naturally. You stop reaching for generic approval and start expressing grounded observation. You begin to speak from awareness instead of habit. And that shift is felt, even if it is not consciously recognized. People can sense when they are being engaged with on a deeper level. They may not always articulate it, but they feel the difference between surface interaction and attentive presence. One feels replaceable, the other feels distinct, and distinction is what creates emotional imprint. So when we say emotional precision creates attraction, what we are really saying is this: people are drawn to those who see them clearly. Not through idealization, not through projection, but through careful, present awareness of who they actually are in real time. Because in a world where most communication is automatic, the rarest thing you can offer is attention that is intentional. And in the end, it is not the compliment that makes someone remember you. It is the feeling that for a moment they were actually understood. And once someone experiences that level of being seen, ordinary interaction is no longer enough. When communication stays on the surface, it creates interaction, but it does not create connection. And this is where most people misunderstand their own presence in a conversation. They believe that saying the right compliment is enough to build attraction, when in reality, attraction is not built through evaluation, it is built through experience. Not what you say about someone, but what they feel when they are with you. This is why shifting from praise to presence changes everything. Presence-based language is not about describing her like an object of admiration. It is about expressing what happens internally in the moment of interaction. It is a subtle but powerful shift from "you are this" to "this is what your presence does." And psychologically, that shift removes the dynamic of judgment completely. There is no ranking, no evaluation, no performance pressure. There is only experience being acknowledged in real time. And that is where connection begins to deepen. When a man says you're beautiful, the statement is directed at appearance. It is static. It freezes the person into a category. But when he expresses how her presence affects the moment, how her energy changes the tone of a conversation, how her way of thinking shifts his attention, how her silence feels intentional rather than empty, he is no longer describing her. He is describing the interaction between two minds, and that is far more intimate than praise. Because now she is not being observed from a distance, she is being experienced in relation. This is a key psychological distinction. Humans are not only responsive to how they are perceived, but also to how they influence their environment. When someone reflects that influence back to them, it creates awareness, and awareness of impact is one of the strongest emotional triggers in communication. It makes a person feel that their presence has weight, not just visibility, but presence. Based communication only works when it is grounded in authenticity. If it is forced, exaggerated, or used as a tactic, it loses its power immediately. Because people are highly sensitive to intention, they can distinguish between someone who is observing and someone who is performing observation. Real presence is quiet. It does not rush to fill silence. It does not rely on landlines. It responds to what is actually happening in the moment. And that responsiveness is what makes it powerful. When you describe how someone's presence affects you emotionally or mentally, you are not trying to elevate them, you are simply articulating reality as you experience it. And that creates a very different dynamic. It removes the transactional nature of complimenting and replaces it with shared awareness. For example, instead of telling her she is attractive, the focus shifts to how her way of speaking changes the direction of your thoughts, or how her calmness creates a different kind of attention in the room, or how her perspective makes a simple conversation feel more layered than expected. These are not rehearsed compliments. They are reflections of lived interaction, and lived interaction is what people remember because it feels real. There is also a deeper philosophical layer here that often goes unnoticed. When communication is rooted in praise, it subtly places one person in the position of evaluator and the other in the position of being evaluated. That creates imbalance. Even if it is socially accepted, it still carries a hidden structure of judgment. But presence-based language dissolves that structure. It removes hierarchy from interaction. Instead of one person defining the other, both people become participants in a shared experience. And in that shared space, communication becomes more equal, more fluid, and more emotionally engaging. This is why certain conversations feel unforgettable even when nothing dramatic is said. It is not the content alone, it is the quality of attention within the exchange. When someone speaks to you in a way that reflects genuine presence, you feel it immediately. There is a sense of being engaged with, not managed, of being met, not evaluated, and that feeling creates emotional imprint. Most people never reach this level of communication because they are too focused on what they should say next instead of what is actually unfolding in front of them. They are anticipating responses instead of observing reality. And when you are not present, your words become disconnected from the moment. They become generic, even if they are well-intended. Presence-based communication demands the opposite. It asks you to stay with what is real, not what is rehearsed, to notice subtle shifts in expression, tone, and energy, and to reflect those shifts honestly in your response. That kind of engagement cannot be faked for long because it comes from attention, not strategy, and attention is what makes language alive. When someone feels that your words are coming from actual presence, they stop experiencing you as someone trying to impress them. They begin to experience you as someone who is genuinely with them in that moment, and that distinction is subtle but powerful. Because being impressed is temporary, but being present is memorable. So the real transformation is not about finding better compliments. It is about changing the source of your communication, moving away from performance and into awareness. From saying what sounds good to saying what is actually being experienced. And when that shift happens, your words stop functioning as social tools and start functioning as emotional reflections. And that is when communication stops being about approval and starts becoming about connection that actually feels real in the moment it is happening. Because in the end, people don't remember how perfectly you spoke to them. They remember how fully you were there when you did.